So my name is Debony Morgan. I am with the organization Zeitgeist here in Atlanta, and we are creating community and educational opportunities for what we call, a la Rami Shapiro, the spiritually independent. And Carl, I'm very excited to announce, is our contemplative in residence. So everything we do, we bounce off Carl and make sure that we're in the right groove and heading in the right direction as we help people in their spiritual growth here in Atlanta and beyond. Also co-hosting tonight is Rebecca Parker from Mary and Martha's Place, another Atlanta organization that really creates this wonderful welcoming space. She can tell you more details later, but for Christian women who are going deeper in their spiritual growth. And Carl will introduce you more deeply to the other artists that are here, but just to name them so you know what you're anticipating, we'll have music from Caroline Herring, and then authors Lerita Coleman Brown and Colette Lafia will be with us as well. But now it's time to have a little bit of that music to get us started. So Caroline, let me turn it over to you and introduce us, get us off on the right path.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Herring, and this is from Psalm 27. Come, says my heart, seek his face. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Come, says my heart, seek his face. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Come, says my heart, seek his face. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Come, says my heart, seek his face. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Come, says my heart, seek his face. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Come, says my heart, seek his face. Your face, O Lord, do I seek. Your face, O Lord, do I seek.
Nice. So Carl, let me turn it over to you to introduce Colette. I'm sure everyone is here because you're familiar with Carl, but in the off chance that you are not, you're about to meet an amazing author, an amazing spiritual teacher. Perhaps you've read some of his other books, like the Big Book of Christian Mysticism and his books on Celtic mysticism. So here we are tonight to celebrate the latest, Eternal Heart. And Carl, it's all yours.
Thank you, Debony. Yeah, let's celebrate the heart tonight. And when the initial conversation with Debony and with Rebecca and with Corey from the Cathedral Bookstore to put together this event, it just seemed to make sense to me to try to open the circle to several other of my friends and colleagues and co-conspirators who have either written about or, in Caroline's case, sung about the wisdom of the heart. So I'm just so honored and thrilled that Caroline and Colette and Lerita are willing to be part of the conversation tonight. And so we're going to begin with Colette, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Colette. Correct me if I'm not. Colette Lafia, is that it, or Lafia? How do you pronounce it?
Lafia.
Lafia. So Colette comes from the Bay Area. She's in San Francisco, and this is her most recent book. It's called The Divine Heart: 7 Ways to Live in God's Love. Colette also wrote a wonderful book about her friendship with a Trappist monk from the Abbey of Gethsemane. And that's how she and I first connected, since we are both kind of monastic nerds. I hope you don't mind me calling you that, Colette. I wave my nerd flag proudly, but we have this shared love of the spirituality of the Trappists, and that's how we became friends. And then it was just in the magic of, just divine serendipity, we both wrote heart books at the same time. Colette's book just came out, about a month and a half ago, right?
Right.
So Colette, share with us some of your wisdom of the heart.
Yeah. Well, I would like to just take a moment. First of all, thank you all. And it's just a joy to be here. And I thought it would be lovely to just take a few minutes and take a few breaths together and sort of connect our hearts kind of in a unified way as we come into this celebratory event. So I'm just going to invite us to take a nice breath in and out. And see if we can settle for a moment into our heart space, into that space of wisdom and deep knowing, which is what Carl's book is all about. So just taking another breath into our heart space and out. And now with our next breath, feeling our hearts connecting into a unified whole. So taking a breath in and out. So welcome, everybody. I'd like to actually begin by reading something from Carl's book and then reading a little bit from my book and just showing the resonance of these two. So in Carl's book, in the section on love, he writes, "Our hearts are the chalices in which the wine of divine love has been poured. We can sense this intuitively whenever we have found ourselves in love or expressing love, or even responding to the love of another. The human heart is calibrated to give and receive human love simply because it is the repository of divine love. We love because God first loved us. When we recognize and celebrate this promise of the heart, we find the power within us not only to be more compassionate, kind, and caring, but also to access deep and lasting joy. Like all gifts of the heart, divine love is not contingent on knowing the right secret, performing the correct ritual, or adhering to the proper doctrine. Sure, there are great resources of wisdom, powerful teachings, and meaningful ceremonies and sacraments that are well worth exploring in any of the world's great sacred traditions. But the promises of the heart are more universal, more foundational than any spiritual system or religious dogma. We find these promises echoed in all the world's great traditions because they point to our universal birthright as human beings. And I would just like to read a little bit from my book as a resonance to see how we are in a conversation of the heart. And that's really what we're all doing. We're all in a conversation of the heart together because of our very lives and the very center of our lives being our divine hearts. So let me just read a beautiful resonance I feel with that he just read. So in my book, The Divine Heart, in the introduction, I read, "The divine heart offers ways to come to know the divine as an intimate relationship, your daily companion, the ground from which all relationships deepen and grow. Awakening to this intimate companionship reveals how home is our heart, our rose, the place in God where we are called friend, embraced as fully as sunlight fills the sky, This is the limitless bounty of love. There are no prerequisites, no degrees, lineage, or credentials are needed. There is no perfect discipline, nor does any one person or approach hold the key for you to enter this relationship and receive God's love. No one else can open the door to your heart, and no outsider is gatekeeper. Only God, only your deepest self. We each enter this intimate relationship with the divine in our own way. We're all born with an inner knowing, an indwelling spirit, and we are always participating in God's love through our very lives. This relationship has known me my entire life. Union with God is my origin. Yet at the same time, I'm constantly discovering, awakening, and allowing the sublime something to reveal itself. It's a mystery that knows me so deeply. It's intertwined with the strands of my hair, the ones I pull back and braid, then let loose to brush against my cheeks. I have long wondered, what will teach me how to be in an intimate relationship with the divine? And now I know it's my heart, God's spirit, and silence. And so here we are, filling these vessels, letting this love pour into us and out of us. And this is what we're celebrating, the wisdom of the heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. So to continue the heart conversation, I'm so happy that a very dear friend of mine from here in Stone Mountain, Georgia, is with us tonight. And she is Dr. Lerita Coleman Brown, who is the author of When the Heart Speaks, Listen. And gosh, I can't remember when I first met Lerita. It had to have been probably 10 years ago or so. And we're both kind of plugged into the contemplative community in Atlanta. We have ties with the monastery and with Ignatius House and with the spiritual direction community here, and now with Zeitgeist. So Lerita, I'll just say very briefly, in addition to having written this book, Lerita is a person who is living with a heart transplant. So her book is the story of her relationship with her old heart and her new heart, and the wisdom that those hearts taught her. It's a delightful book. It's a very honest book, very vulnerable, and also at times very, very fun, amusing in a very gentle way. So I won't say any more. I want to give the microphone over to Lerita now. So.
Thank you so much, Carl. It's just such a delight to be with you and with all of you who have joined to celebrate this new book by Carl. It's such a gem. And I first want to congratulate you, Carl, because we know how hard it is to write a book anytime. And I also want to thank the Cathedral Bookstores, Zeitgeist, and Mary and Martha's Place. These are all start with organizations in our community that really promote the contemplative life. And I'm just so honored to be part of this program tonight. So as Carl mentioned, I wrote conversations with my old and new hearts about, it's coming up with like 27 years, I think. I was told in the middle of my life, in the middle of my career, that I was going to need a heart transplant. And of course, like most people, I just totally freaked out and didn't exactly know what to do. And so luckily, I had this wonderful therapist named Ricardo Sparse. I was living in Colorado at the time, who told me maybe I needed to have a conversation with my heart. And so I thought it was going to be a conversation. It turned out to be several conversations that spanned not only preparing for the heart transplant, but welcoming a heart from somebody else, which was really quite daunting. And I just used a Jungian technique called active imagination. And I feel like I was recording this conversation between my inner self and my heart as these dialogues ranged across a number of topics. The first part really focuses on conversations with my old heart, which reminded me that I needed to prepare a place. I needed to get rid of some stuff, some emotional baggage, some of these things that we rarely pay attention to, but might be really holding us back and really clogging up the heart so that we can actually hear this wonderful wisdom that Carl talks about in his book. And the second part really was about welcoming a new heart. And my heart would occasionally remind me that I needed to continue to have this space in my heart for it to sing and dance so that I could feel joy. But if I was carrying around all these, this resentment and disappointments or, whatever emotional baggage that I had, it was taking up space and I needed to let that go. What's remarkable though is that there are so many parallels between some of the wisdom that my heart's conveyed to me and some of the gifts that Carl reminds us that are in our hearts for free. It's not like we have to do anything. It's not like we have to earn this. It's just there. I really particularly love the sections on silence and discernment and wisdom and love and joy and courage, just even the origins of that word, having heart. I know that during the first week of my transplant, someone came to my room, another transplant recipient, and said, you're very courageous. And I was like, what? But I learned what that was over the course of the first year. And so it was just really a delight to then begin to see some of those parallels in Carl's book. This idea that faith gives us strength to root out some of these things that my heart's told me I needed to get rid of so that inner healing could occur. And also they reminded me that in order to maneuver through a heart transplant, I was really going to have to slow down, pay attention, and listen inwardly without ceasing. And my old heart said, if you don't slow down, you're going to wear out that new heart in no time. So you need to clearly slow it down. But what's interesting is that what Carl talks about is that, the presence of God is everywhere. And particularly, you say on page 16, remember to keep my eyes open for the hidden presence of God feels like the skill needed to drive through thick fog. It's about paying attention and listening carefully and knowing when to slow down or even stop. And that was a continual message that I got, which was that pay attention, listen inwardly. You are going to need these gifts that have been given to us in order to maneuver through hospitalizations and medical personnel and all the components of a post-transplant living. It was like a roller coaster that I just didn't really want to get on, but I was on. So I sort of feel like in my book, I kind of scraped the surface. Carl digs much deeper to uncover the spiritual gifts in the heart that really are awaiting our awareness. I mean, they're just there. And I found that in writing my book on talking to my old and new hearts, it was called, the tagline was Discovering Inner Wisdom, was very healing for me. But reading Carl's book was very healing to me. And, there are gems throughout, like it's all in your heart. Everything you need to find your way directly into the divine presence is there as well. You are merely finding your way into a blessing that is already given. These gifts are already given. They are already present. So that was very healing for me, just as a reminder. But I was also reminded too as you talk about love, you said the love that's been so generously given to our hearts is divine love, the love of God. This love makes it possible to have hope, which is clearly something you need when you're dealing with any kind of medical ordeal, to have hope no matter how difficult or challenging life circumstances might be. Take a moment to contemplate this with me. You already contain in your heart the love of God. And it was so important, not only in the days and weeks and months and years after my initial transplant, but when I needed to have another transplant, a kidney transplant, and when I needed to have a valve replaced on the heart. So all of these gifts that you have highlighted for us, Carl, in your book, are things that we can continue. It's sort of like living wisdom, right? Continue to feed us. And just one final thing, I really appreciate the fact that, Carl, you challenge your audience and your readers in this book. And you basically say receiving divine love isn't just for you. And I often say to people, your spiritual growth isn't just for you, but for everyone and all of creation. And so you say, what kind of transformation does the gift of love call us to? People who actively oppose efforts to create a more just society or just turned a blind eye to suffering of those who are harmed by system of privilege or oppression, suffered from a kind of spiritual lack. They are part of of those whose divine hearts have not yet been transformed. Yet again and again, you mention how it is that one can awaken to these gifts that are in the heart and to start accessing these. So I'm just going to stop there because I could be talking through the whole time about all the gems that are in this book. But I'm so grateful that you decided to write about the heart, because I remember in writing my conversations, someone said, you should share these. And I thought, well, not really. They said, look, talking to your heart is probably easier than having a conversation with God for most people. So I think that in reminding us about all the gifts of our heart, that we will be able to continue along this path, this mystical path, to not only the joy, but the courage that it takes to continue along in it. So thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Lerita. So I want to maybe read a section or two from the book, share a little bit about kind of how this book came to be. But before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge two people who are with us tonight. I'm not going to put them on the spot and ask them to say anything, but I just want to acknowledge that they're here. And the first one is Lil Copan, and Lil is the editor who worked with me to give birth to this book. Lil and I have actually worked together. This is the third book that we have worked together on. Previously, we worked on Befriending Silence and on The Unteachable Lessons. And she's a super editor, and I'm just really privileged to be able to work with her. And I'm so happy you're here tonight, Lil. Thanks for being here. The other person I want to mention is my dear, dear friend and fellow lay Cistercian, Linda Mitchell, who is with us tonight. Linda is one of the three people to whom this book is dedicated. So once again, I'm very, very happy, Linda, that you could join us. Let me read. I'm going to read a dream that I share in this book. And it's a dream that actually came to me while I was writing the book. It came to me about a year ago. I finished the book last summer. So as the book was being finished, we were in, pandemic time. As I was working on the final draft, the horrors of last summer, the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery were coming to light. And as a country, we were responding to those things. So it was an incredible time to be working on this book. I was constantly thinking about Julian of Norwich and her working on her book in the midst of the time of the bubonic plague. So in the midst of all of that, one night I had this dream. And so the dream found its way into the book. One night I dreamt that I was driving home. I was driving in the eastern suburbs of Atlanta, heading toward my home near the town of Clarkston. From Church Street, I turned left onto Northern Avenue, where I would drive about 3/4 of a mile before coming to the verdant, forested neighborhood where Fran and I live. And Fran's with us tonight, too. As I drove down Northern Avenue, something shifted in my dream space, and it was no longer my road, but rather an unfamiliar street in an imaginal space. This often happens to me in dreams, and I suspect it often happens to you as well. As can happen in the dream world, at first I didn't realize that this shift had occurred. I drove away through a beautiful residential neighborhood with plenty of well-tended green lawns and leafy, mature trees. The road took me over rolling hilltops and curved gently here and there. Without consciously realizing it, I began to drive faster and faster. Then I looked at my speedometer. I was going 69, almost double the street's 35 miles per hour speed limit. I know I often zip along as I travel through this suburban forest, but this felt way too fast, even for me. I wanted to slow down, but I didn't just pump the brakes. Part of me wanted to keep going as fast as I could, while another, perhaps more sensible part, knew I needed to decelerate. I gently raised my foot off the gas pedal in order to slow down, just a little bit at first. The speedometer reading changed from 69 to 67 to about 65 or so. I could see I wasn't slowing down fast enough. As I write these words, I'm amused at the inner paradox. I eased up my foot altogether from the accelerator and allowed the car to coast, gradually slowing down as I continued to drive along the hills and curves of what I still imagined was the road home. Then I rounded a sharper curve right by the empty lot that over a decade ago had been purchased to set up a school for refugee children. But along this dream world Northern Avenue, that lot was no longer there. In its place, I suddenly saw a large body of water, like the ocean perhaps, or a great lake, or maybe even a Scottish loch. Surf sprayed along a rocky shoreline just a few feet away and below the edge of the pavement. As beautiful as the water was, it's not what grabbed my attention. What I did see all around me were children, probably anywhere from 8 to 14 years old, 24 or more of them, all floating and flying around and above me in a colorful assortment of paragliders. I slowed the car down so I could marvel at what I saw. The water to my left kept crashing against the rocks beneath the road, and I could see that the kids were launching their paragliders right there on the shoreline, where the offshore breeze was strong enough to suddenly push them up into the sky. Not too high, maybe just 30 or 40 feet or so, but enough so that they could, for just a few giddy moments, fly. And indeed they flew, above me, around me, to both my right and my left, circling and dancing in the sky, diving and spinning above the water, above the road, and landing in a field to my right. And then as soon as they landed, they would pick up their paragliders and run across the road to the shore to catch the wind and ascend again. In this imaginal dream space, some of the kids even flew paragliders that could accommodate 2 passengers, doubles or 2-seaters, if you will, with long bars that the children could sit on as they rode their magic sailing ships up above the road. I was close enough to see their smiles and faces glowing with delight. While some flew tandem with friends or classmates, others rode solo, navigating their little aircraft all by themselves. The wings of the paragliders featured every color you can imagine, a rainbow of delight filling the sky. I drove through this prismatic array of girls and boys flying joyously, and if the water wasn't clue enough that I had entered a non-ordinary neighborhood, the road came to an abrupt end where the tarmac gave way to a field of grass. I had reached the end of the mainland, water now on both sides, and only a small grassy isthmus stretched out ahead of me. It was so narrow that it seemed better for walking than for driving. I could have driven on it if I had wanted, but once I left the mainland, it would have been too narrow to turn my car around. I wanted to go home, so I did turn my vehicle around there at the very end of the road, and then slowly, yes, slowly, made my way back under and among the colorful kids who continue to fly. I think I'll stop there. But I go on to explain how the dream ended kind of poignantly because I felt a wave of sadness that when I was a child, I didn't fly. I didn't have that sense of light. I was a child that struggled with anxiety, that struggled with depression. I was socially awkward. I was painfully shy. Some of you are thinking, how could that be? Well, I've grown a lot. But but the dream touched that. It touched that place in my heart, that kind of wounded place, that sad place. And I woke up feeling that sadness, but also feeling the delight and the joy that I saw in those dream children and the delight that they felt. And so I think that the dream came to me not only to encourage me to continue the work that I've been doing literally for decades now, to heal my own fear and to more fully embrace the trust and the confidence and the courage that I do believe comes from the Spirit that has brought healing, a measure of healing into my life. But also I felt that the dream really did capture the promise of this book, which is captured in the subtitle, this idea that we all have a mystical path to a joyful life encoded in our own hearts. And so, today is the official publication date of the book. The book has been in some stores for a few days now, but today is the technical publication date. And so I've been, as part of this launch, I've been doing a number of podcast interviews and some YouTube interviews. And of course, what a lot of the interviewers are asking me is, well, why did you write this book? Tell us the story of the book. So let me see if I can briefly do that now. The book really emerged out of a single line out of the Jewish scriptures, what in the Christian world is called the Old Testament, from the book of Ecclesiastes. If any of you are familiar with that old song from Pete Seeger or from the Byrds, to every time there is a season, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to dance, a time to refrain from dancing, et cetera, et cetera. That comes from the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes. And this verse comes from that same chapter, just a few lines after that famous poem about there being a season for every purpose. This verse, the closest to try to be faithful to the original Hebrew in English, because different Bibles translate it in different ways. But the verse basically says this. It's Ecclesiastes 3:11. It says, God has made everything beautiful in its time, and God has placed eternity in the human heart. God has made everything beautiful in its time and has placed eternity in the human heart. And I read this as somebody who is engaged with the Christian tradition. That is my root spiritual path. I like to think of myself as somebody who has a deep affinity for all the contemplative paths around the world, but my root path is certainly the Christian path. And so, coming out of that tradition, obviously, the Bible carries some spiritual authority. It's seen as a sacred text. And so for me, I received this verse as a promise that God, the Spirit, places eternity in our hearts. And thinking about that, I was just blown away by it. I mean, it's a tremendous, tremendous gift. And I spent some time praying about it and meditating about it, reflecting on it. And it really led me to this question of, well, what other gifts are in our hearts? And so I did a little bit of kind of just some biblical kind of sleuthing, some Bible study, some research. Whenever I would be reading somebody and they would quote a verse that refers to the heart, I would make a note of it. And over time, I've lost track now, but more than 8, at least 9 or 10, maybe even more than that, verses in Scripture that speak of gifts that are given to us in our hearts. Gifts given to us in our hearts. As Lerita mentioned, not something we have to earn or we have to somehow prove ourselves worthy of, but simply gifts that are given. And so I identified 8 of those. And the number 8 really it tracks with the Beatitudes, with Jesus's wisdom teachings about the secrets of a joyful life or a happy life or a blessed life. And so I could see how these 8 gifts correlated to those 8 Beatitudes. And then to just kind of deepen the conversation, for each one of the gifts, I also brought in the voice of a Christian mystic and the voice of a wisdom teacher from outside the Christian tradition. So we have Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, and Buddhist, and pagan wisdom teachers showing up in the book as well. So as I worked with these gifts and really just tried to reflect on, what is the promise? What do they offer us? The first of the gifts is that God puts a highway in our hearts. And you might say, a highway? Well, don't think about like, Interstate 95, or, some sort of huge asphalt monstrosity. Think about highways that would have been understood 2,000 or 2,500 years ago. This idea of a pathway, of a thoroughfare that helps us to get to where we want to go. And so I realized there that all the gifts really represent milestones on this pathway, this highway in our heart, and that the destination point really did seem to be that of joy or of felicity. So that's the basic kind of the backstory of the book. And there's so much more that I could share with you. But what I'd like to do before we kind of open this up for a little bit of a conversation is I just want to share a prayer that I put in the book. And I hope that this is a prayer that you might find meaningful or useful. And so I invite you to join with me now. Let's just hold this moment as a prayer moment. Heavenly God, to fully know and receive and appreciate your divine presence in our lives, guide us to love as you love. Show us how to see as you see. Teach us to forgive as you forgive. Inspire us to be creative as you are creative. Direct us to manifest delight and felicity and beatitude and joy as you manifest all these. And most of all, through your Spirit, may our hearts beat as your heart, our 2 hearts beating as one. Amen. So it's really, writing this book has been a spiritual journey for me. And, the dream that I shared with you, it shows up in the final chapter in the book where I talk about the gift of courage. And Lerita, of course, speaks of her courage in moving through the transplant journey. And of course, the word courage literally means having heart. It's, the word in French, sacred heart, sacre coeur. So courage means to have heart. So that the heart is the seat of our faith, our confidence, our stick-to-itiveness, our ability to be present in the world and to make positive choices and commitments. But it is also I truly believe more than anything else, the place where we receive the joyful presence of the divine, the one who is the source of all love, who gives us love and yet who is love, so therefore who gives us God's very own self. So I think I'm going to stop right here and invite Lerita and Colette and Caroline, if you care to join in as well, that if we could all just reflect a little bit together on just kind of our shared vision of the heart and how we understand the heart as this chalice of wisdom. But before we do that, I do just want to take a moment and just offer a brief kind of word from one of our sponsors, and that is the Cathedral Bookstore. I just want to mention, obviously, we hope that some of you will see fit to get a copy of this book. And I just want to encourage you to consider making your purchase through the Cathedral Bookstore. It's an independent bookstore here in Atlanta, affiliated with the Episcopal Cathedral of St. Philip. And the bonus is I went there yesterday and I signed every copy that they have. So if you can buy the book, from, I won't say the name, from the big website or from, your local chain bookstore, or support your local independent bookstore, which is a really good thing to do. But if you buy it from the Cathedral Bookstore, you will get a signed copy. Corey, are you here? Maybe if you could give us the URL of the Cathedral Bookstore. So
Yeah.
can,
Hey, Carl. Thank you. That was wonderful. I'm Corey. I'm the manager of the Cathedral Bookstore. Nice to see all of you tonight. We put it in the chat box. We put a link you can go to access the book, directly access the book on our website. If you don't want to use that link, you can go to thecathedralbookstore.org. And Carl has got his own section in it. We have a listing of all of the books that he's written that you could purchase through us. And they are all signed copies, not just the current one he has out. So thank you for your support. And yeah, thank you, Carl, for including us.
Well, thank you, Corey. So, and let's see. So somebody asked if they can order it and pick it up at the bookstore, and you can do that.
Absolutely. Upon checkout, you'll have the option. You can choose to have it shipped directly to you or pick it up in the store. And if you do have it picked up in the store, of course, you can come in, or we can bring it out if you feel more comfortable with that. Either way.
But the store is open. Fran and I were there yesterday. So, please feel free to go visit them.
Store is open Monday through Friday from 10 to 4 and Saturday and Sunday from 10 until 2, except for this weekend we're closed for the holidays.
It's a beautiful store. Y'all should visit if you've not been there. It's a lovely place to visit.
Thank you, Fran.
So, so Lerita and Colette, would you maybe speak to the idea of how our hearts can guide us? What insights have you had from writing your books and from your own spiritual practice in terms of the heart as our guide? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
I could say something. I would say for myself, I really feel like our heart holds a spiritual intuition, a knowing that we are born with, that when we listen deeply, we can tap into that, a sense that we come from this source and are connected to this source of love. That was really the exploration of my book, was really tapping into that divine love that is pouring itself out and creating all things, creating me, creating the rivers, creating the oceans, creating everyone. And that I am connected to this incredible source of love. And I feel like the heart holds that knowledge. It knows that. It's intuitive. So for myself, I would say for that, really inviting people to tap in to the intuitive knowing that the heart holds of this source of love that we are deeply connected to.
I would agree with Colette. I think that the heart is the place. Sometimes we often get lost in our minds, and things look very different. Things feel very different when you begin to look at them through your heart. Whether it's a person who's struggling or some situation that you're having difficulty with, if sometimes you can look at that circumstance through the heart, you begin to see something very different. And so I've always had that sense that our hearts carried not only our feelings, but this deep, deep inner wisdom that you speak of, Carl, and you speak of, Colette. I think that's just one of those universal truths, and that it is important to pay attention to our hearts. We have so many other metaphors in life for the heart, often getting it confused with something romantic. But unfortunately, we see children that are full of heart or in touch with their hearts, and it gets schooled away as they, learn to pay more attention to, in some cases, their cognitive lives as opposed to where their heart is leading them, or that sort of intuitive gift that lies in the heart. So whether you want to have a conversation with your heart, or whether or not you just want to be quiet and listen to it, it's just the perfect guide. And as a matter of fact, I had thought about that as one of the titles for my book, Let Your Heart Be Your Guide, because I think it is full of such wisdom.
I just wanted to add, though, that to add to this conversation, that in my book, I also write, in biblical language, heart means our whole being. And so our heart is our inmost being. It's actually like where we have our wholeness. It's our integrated self. And so I value the wisdom teaching that we move the mind into the heart, that the heart is the spiritual organ almost of perception. It's where there's a wholeness, it's integrated. And so I like to look at it as that, and I just wanted to add that to our conversation.
And I want to say, Carl, that I appreciate your alluding to the Heart Math Institute and how they found that there are sort of neurons in the heart, and how important it can be in helping us to see differently, but also in thinking about it as the very core, as you said, Colette, at the very core of our being. It's just a topic that we could be talking about all night. I know we can't.
Yeah, one of the things when I realized I wanted to write about the heart, of course, there's this moment of humility and realizing, kind of like your journey, Lerita, realizing how little, not only did I know my heart, but how little I knew the heart in general. So, I read a number of books that do look at kind of the physiology of the human heart, and they were all just mind blowers. That the heart really is the second brain. That the neural density in the heart is second only to the brain. And so all of the language that we have about how the heart knows, the wisdom of the heart, the intuition of the heart, all of that, really science is catching up with that. And we're seeing that there is this kind of deeper way of knowing that isn't the kind of linear cognitive way, but that is deeply intuitive, deeply spiritual, I dare say deeply mystical. And so, taking the time, and when you think about the Orthodox Christians, the whole idea of the Jesus prayer, that to sink the mind into the heart, or the cloud of unknowing, that we can't think our way to God, but we could love our way to God. This message shows up in different expressions, different articulations, but again and again over history, not to denigrate what's above the neck, that still has its important gift to play, but to really seek kind of a synergy. And that, the cover design of the book, obviously the 8 is the 8 gifts of the heart. And of course, it's a visual pun because you turn it this way and you have the eternal, the infinity, which is the eternality of the eternal heart. But the other thing, and I didn't even realize this till after I had my physical copy of the book, but I realized that this is the energy of head and heart. And that this idea that the heart energy and the head energy need to to integrate together like the Mobius strip or the infinity symbol or the lemniscate, whatever you want to call it. And I realized that really almost, in the mystical tradition, we talk about paradox, Mary and Martha, a cataphatic and apophatic, God is a God of love that affirms us, and yet we're called to die to be one with God. All of these paradoxes. My book on Christian mysticism has the longest chapters on the mystical paradoxes. And I realized that the figure 8 energy is the resolution of all the paradoxes, that each paradox has an energy field that unites it together, and that we need both. We have to dip into one and then dip into the other, and dip into one and dip into the other to find that holistic place.
And
So
it's just like one of the senses. I don't know why it's not included.
I don't either, but there we go. So I'm wondering if I'd like to get another music moment with Caroline. But before we do that, maybe we should just mention that if anybody from the participants has a question for us, for either myself or for Lerita or for Colette or for Caroline, please type it in the chat box. I think Rebecca and Debony are going to be monitoring the chat box, and we should have a few minutes before we wrap up to field any questions. And if there are more questions than we have time to field them, then I might answer a few on my blog at a later date. But please feel free to type in your questions. And maybe now we should I should turn the microphone over to Caroline. So
Carl, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's a great pleasure and joy to be a part of this. And I take the conversation of the heart to very simple terms. The heart hurts, the heart needs, the heart desperately longs. And Carl invites that heart, the restless heart. And I was so grateful because my heart is that heart at this time. And this song, this verse from Psalm 131 is, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not lifted high. And I would say that this is talking about darting eyes and a restless heart. And like a weaned child, like an infant resting against its mother, there is no self-consciousness there. The deep need is met. I love that image, that sacred heart. My heart is not proud. My eyes are not lifted high. My heart is not proud. My eyes are not lifted high. Instead, I have stilled my soul. Stilled my soul. And calmed my heart. Calmed my heart. My heart is not proud. My eyes are not lifted high. My heart is not proud. My eyes are not lifted high. Instead, I have stilled my soul. Stilled my soul. And calmed my heart. Calmed my heart. like a weaned child with its mama, like a weaned child with its mama, like a weaned child with its mama. So is my soul.
Thank you, Caroline. And I realized I didn't do my plug for you, so let me do it now. Both of the pieces that you played tonight come from this particular CD, isn't that right? Verses by Caroline Herring. You've got what, 5 or 6 albums, and I think I have all of them or most of them, and they're all wonderful. But this one especially, it's all scripture passages. So anyone who is just looking for some lovely meditative music, I think you can get them from Caroline's website, and it's just a wonderful CD. So so I know we have a couple of questions, maybe. If Rebecca, have you been monitoring those, Rebecca or Debony?
Yes. And the first one was Caroline's music. So thank you for answering where we can find that. And Caroline, if you want to type that information into the chat box, that would be great too. And people can see it. So the first question I have from the group is there a Heart 101 book to read before going to Heart 404? For those of us who are new to thinking about the heart. Any of the three of you?
Well, at the risk of being self-promoting, I would say the 3 books we're looking at tonight are great places to start. But you know, a lot of it depends on what you're looking for, because you know, some books do take more of a kind of a physiological approach. There is a book, the author's name is Robert Pearsall, I believe, and I don't remember the title off the top of my head, but I can look it up in just a minute. But his book I found was very interesting because he was looking at the kind of the science of the heart and the science of the heart as an instrument of knowing and of wisdom. So, you know, obviously Lerita's book and Colette's book and my book all come at it from very much a spiritual perspective, which I think is certainly commendable. So, but a nice counterpoint would be a book like Pearsall's book that gives you more of that kind of scientific approach. If Colette or Lerita, if you want to jump in, and I'll try to find the title of that book.
And I can honestly say to you, do not be intimidated by Carl's book. I mean, I can see why you would be, but it is gentle and it is inviting and it is really helpful. And I think it is as fine an introduction to Heart 101, as you put it, as anything is. And so I would say you've landed it.
Thank you, Caroline. I think you're answering to what some people are feeling, that they might not have thought about the heart this way before, and it may be new. Lerita or Colette, a response before we go to another question?
I echo with Caroline. I do think Carl's book, and for being self-promoting, I do think also my book, because my book really talks about our relationship to love, which is really what we're all living. And so I think both of these and Lerita's book would give a wonderful way to just explore. And one thing I want to encourage people is any book that you pick up, you can find something for yourself in it. So I almost wouldn't let any book intimidate me. I know when I went to the living school, we read a lot of the mystics and the contemplatives, and you just jump in and a paragraph or that will speak to you. And then you read another book and it builds over time. Because what you'll see is you'll see as your own wisdom of your heart starts awakening and growing. These things will intuitively start resonating and making sense for you. So I really encourage people, just jump in. You're okay. You've got the anchor of your own heart and you'll be good.
I would also like to add, let your heart be your guide and just read whatever you're drawn to. And I will say, I did not read Carl's book in chronological order. I first read the chapters that just I wanted to read about, and then I went back and picked up the rest. But and I know that typically we read books from cover to cover, but in some ways I found it just delightful to be able to just read about a particular thing like discernment or wisdom or joy or whatever. And you can pick up the pieces as you go along. It's not, as people have said, it's not intimidating at all.
So the book that I would recommend in addition to our books is The Heart's Code by Paul Pearsall. And I put it in the chat box so you can grab that title. So that would give you kind of more of a scientific approach. And then of course, the 3 books we've talked about tonight definitely give you that spiritual.
Great, thanks. So the next question I have is directed to Lerita. And the question is, how has having someone else's heart changed your perception of your gifts, or has it?
Wow, quite a question. One of the things we know is that the physical heart that we have is the physical heart. It's not really, our spiritual heart. And I think regardless of whose heart we have, we are still able to access the same gifts. I think probably the most important part of having the transplant was, one, having a major disruption in the middle of my life. I was not necessarily walking the spiritual path. Yeah, I read about spirituality every now and then, but it got my attention. And I think it was really important for me to, because I was definitely type A, in a hurry, in a rush, competitive. I was a professor. It really made me stop, pause, and to consider what I needed to do to make a change in heart. I really needed to make a change in heart, for real. I mean, physically, obviously, but in all ways, in all the various ways of my life, I needed to make a change in heart. So I suspect that people don't always think of illness as a gift, but it can be. In making you actually have to slow down and stop and look at your life and look at what you're doing, so that perhaps maybe you can make the changes that you need to make. But at the same time, I also got the gift of realizing that my heart was trying to help me, despite the fact that I might have been, as it said from time to time, the old heart said I was abusing it by overworking, but that it was trying to help me get back on the spiritual path. So I do know who my donor is. I am in contact with her family. I've had, a long, rich relationship with her friends, but it really wasn't having somebody else's heart as it was, losing my heart that I had and gaining another and going through the whole process of that.
Thank you, Lerita. It's about time to begin closing up our evening. I'm having beautiful comments come up, and I can see that all of you have them available to read. There's wisdom in this gathering. There is so much that all of you hold in your hearts and that and you're sharing it with one another here. We're grateful to you for being with us tonight and having the opportunity to share at this level on a Zoom call, to share our insights and what we're learning. Carl, Colette, Lerita, any closing comments you would like to make? And then we'll remind you one more time about the bookstore.
We just got in a question from Billy, and I don't think I can do it justice in just 2 minutes. But Billy, I'm going to see about possibly responding to that on my blog. So stay tuned and we'll see because that's a great question. She's asking a question about practice and also looking at it from an inner spiritual perspective. So
Absolutely.
I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. But Lerita, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
So I found writing my book to be very transformative, and I'm wondering how writing this book has impacted you or your life.
You know, it's in a way it's too soon to tell because obviously now it's the, sharing the book, and that I see the sharing it as part of the process. Here's a phrase that just blurted out of my mouth when I was doing a podcast last week, and it really has stayed with me. I was telling the podcast interviewer, I said, a book is like a conversation in slow motion. And I really think that's true because I find myself still in dialogue with books that I wrote 20 years ago. And I think I'll still be in dialogue with this book 20 years from now. So in a way, the process isn't done yet. Maybe the editing is done and the layout and all that. Now we're into marketing, but then will come the reviews and people will respond, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to really directly address what you're asking me, Lerita, it's hard because the book, the moment it came at the moment of the pandemic. And, so all of that is kind of woven in together. But, the last book that I did, The Unteachable Lessons, and then this book, in many ways have represented a little bit of a departure for me because my previous books were more, kind of, researchy. I would be talking about, Celtic wisdom or talking about Christian mystics or talking about contemplative prayer. And it was more kind of reporting just what I had learned, it kind of from the head. I tried to write them from a heart space, but still they were, not as much about my journey. Whereas these last two books, I put more of myself into them. And what really has emerged for me is kind of my life journey of moving from fear to faith. And I'm still on that journey. I still sometimes get lost in my angst and my lack of trust, my lack of faith. But I think as I've written these books and have been praying through the issues and reflecting on the wisdom that I've been in conversation with, I've been inspired to make that journey from faith to fear, or from bad Freudian slip, from fear to faith, more of a priority in my own life. And I think I'm in a more faith-filled place than I was 2 or 5 years ago. Some people know that my wife and I lost a child 7 years ago. It'll be 7 years ago in August. And it was a tremendous journey. I do talk about it in the book Unteachable Lessons. And Rhiannon shows up in this book too, because she's just such an important part of my own story as well. But, we went through the incredible sense of bereavement and of mourning and of loss. And we still have those moments when our hearts are just, kind of broken. But to a place of where Fran and I like to talk about is we see Rhiannon up in heaven cheering us on, that mom and dad, you live your best life now. And so we're trying to do that as an act of love to her and to her memory. And I'm just, I'm in a good place in my life journey, and I'm so thrilled with this book and thrilled with the people who are choosing to be in the conversation with me. So, you know, the book has been a blessing for me. I hope it's a blessing for other people too.
Thank you so much, Carl, for your transparency and for your willingness to share your journey. It enriches us all. And I think as we close, you have the information about where to buy the book, and you have information about or you can Google any of our organizations and find out. But let us close just with quieting and finding our heart. And know the gratitude and the sense of holding something important together, and the community of fellow travelers. With gratitude, we send you into the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.